In this last unit, we're going to talk about change and how to make change, more effectively. Because that's really an important kind of issue, when we're thinking about treatment. Not just does treatment work, but when does it work? So we know, for example, that both antidepressants and cognitive therapy work better than placebos. And antidepressants seem to work a little bit faster. So there's about 7% more responding at 8 weeks. By 16 weeks, that difference is gone, and antidepressants and cognitive therapy seem to be equivalent. But we also remember that there is this difference here in terms of relapse. So 2 years out, there are about twice as many people who've relapsed and who are again experiencing symptoms of depression. For the groups, here's our placebo group, but for our antidepressant groups, when they're off, they are much more likely to relapse. Here, our cognitive therapy group, it seemed both to do better during the continuation period and even in the follow-up period. So let's think about this a little bit. And one of the things I'd like you to think about are some of the advantages and disadvantages to change. It's not really as easy as we think, or as we think it should be for other people. We're actually pretty good at recognizing how hard it is for us. So often we're going to have to pull people to change. So let's start by thinking about medications. There are a variety of things that make it hard for people to stay on their medications, including some of the side effects, just some behavioral things like remembering to to take your medication every day. It's sometimes inconvenient. There are, some treatment factors. How does this fit in with everything else going on? And then also some healthcare, provider-patient interaction factors. So, how do you work with your physician? Do you have a good relationship with that person? Do you feel good about the work that they're doing? That makes a big difference. So what can we do to improve compliance? And I think that there are a number of things, or the relationship between doctor and patient makes a big difference. Obviously, cost really plays in here. Some medications are so expensive that it's very difficult for people to afford. The fewer side effects, more likely, that people are going to stay on their medications. Remember that some of the side effects for medications that we've looked at this semester are pretty nasty, particularly for the antipsychotics. And when there's greater social support, so when friends and family members, think that the medication is a good thing, they are working with this person towards better mental health. Sometimes even when they're reminding and saying, hey, it's time to take your medication. Have you done so yet? Those things help. I think another thing we should be thinking about is it's not just yes or no, but how are we thinking about change? And remember, we may not always be aware that there's a problem. And so, this is one of those treatment factors. If we're not aware that there is a problem, or we don't buy into the fact that there's a problem, it's going to be hard to stay on our medication or to work towards, in this case, staying clean and dry. Remember, we talked about contemplation, that the person may be aware of alcohol-related consequences, but be ambivalent about that change. Here, what we need to do is focus on that ambivalence. In this case, under action, we may begin to cut down or stop drinking, even though the change hasn't yet become permanent. But we need to think about how are we going to keep clean and dry. So probably many of you have at one point or another stayed on or made a change. Maybe you lost some weight, maybe you changed your study habits, and then you went back to the old pattern. What helps you? And if you can begin to think about what makes that difference, what prevents relapse, you're going to be more successful in your work. So we know that there are some situations where therapy is ineffective, pretty much consistent with what we talked about in terms of medication. Andre, in his video on MindTap, describes some of these. So having a poor relationship between therapist and client, having a poor choice of treatment if for some reason the person is non-compliant with treatment, or if the therapist and client just don't share goals. So they both need to be on the same page, think that where they're going makes sense and is useful and important. Lambert has done some really interesting research on when treatment is effective and what makes it effective. Some part is those techniques and skills, and we tend to focus primarily on those, but that only accounts for about 15%. This next part of our pie, we're not surprised at, thinking about the placebo effect. Having a sense of hope seems to make treatment more effective if we believe that it's going to be helpful. You may want to go back and watch the movie Dumbo, where that sense of hope, the believing that he could fly, really helped him fly. The experience of the therapeutic relationship makes a big difference. So it's not just what the therapist does, but how does the client perceive that? And as you talk to your friends about classes, you know that not everyone perceives the same teacher in the same way. One person thinks that particular professor walks on water, and another, not so much. Same with therapy. And clients who believe in their therapist, not surprisingly, do better. And that probably goes in both ways. That, one reason that the client believes in their therapist is that they're being helpful. But because they see that, makes them more helpful. Now, this is maybe a surprising part. Some of those things outside of the therapy room make a difference. We've talked about expressed emotion. What kinds of things, how is our parents responding? How are family members responding to this person who, is mentally ill? And when they are responding with judgment, criticism, hostility, they do more poorly. But other kinds of things, like just happening to read a particular book, getting a new job, getting a new relationship, breaking up, all sorts of things also affect what makes treatment effective. Almost all therapists approach therapy with these three ideas fundamental to their work. Unconditional positive regard. So approaching that person with acceptance and in a non-judgmental fashion. Believing in them. Accurate empathy. So listening carefully to the other person, hearing what they are, their experience from their point of view, not just from our point of view. And responding in a genuine fashion. So being real with that person rather than trying to, be fake or, do what you think the other person wants. And these three ideas are true both in and outside of therapy. So you might think about how your best friend or your parents or other people in your life have done some of these sorts of things. So what should you do now? Consider when change is easy and when it's more difficult for you. What makes it easier? What makes it more difficult? What does this mean in terms of your ability for helping other people change? Because as you understand the change process better, you're going to become a much stronger change agent. And take care.